Welcome to round two of the Vintage Rock and Pop Shop here on WFDU FM. Our guest this hour, well, not the whole hour, but for 20 or so minutes, is Bob Leszczak, who's returning to the show. He was on just a few months back talking about his book, Single-Season Sitcoms. Now he has a book called Who Did It First? Great Rhythm and Blues Cover Songs and Their Original Artists. Bob's also a DJ, and I'm guessing that what happens to me all the time is something that happened to you. You play a song, and someone will call up and say, did you know that that's not the original version of the song, that there was one that came out a few years earlier?
Well, actually, it's actually the reverse. Many times when I would intro these records, and I've been compiling a list for years and years and years of this with the intention of writing a book one day, and lo and behold, that has happened. 3 volumes, in fact, are coming. And the first one is out. And what I would do on the radio is announce that somebody did the song before. In fact, it was usually the person that wrote the song that did it first. And that was usually to the amazement of the listener. I would get calls saying, really? Somebody? Because they grew up with a certain version. So to them, that was the original. It was the biggest hit, yes, but many times there's more to the story. There's more backstory there, and that's what the book is all about.
Well, you just mentioned subsequent volumes of Who Did It First, and I imagine in compiling all these volumes, you would have had to have started with a gigantic list.
It was so big, the list, in fact, when I presented it to the publisher, they said, you know, there's enough here to do 3 volumes. But the problem initially was, how do we break it down? We were thinking titles from A to G, and then H to... But it just seemed so weird to have a book stop at the letter G. So they were puzzled, thinking, how do we do this? And I said, why don't we do one book that's all songs that started in R&B, one that was all songs that started in pop or crossover country, and then a rock and roll book. And they said, that's the answer, that's it, and that's the way we've done it. In fact, all 3 volumes are done. We're just waiting for the release on 2 and 3. Volume 2 will come out in March, and Volume 3, I'm told, just found out, will come out in July. But Volume 1, the R&B volume, is out.
Yeah, it sure is. You know, as you mentioned when you were talking on the air and saying, you know, did you know there was an original version of a specific song? I had the same experience going through your book. Obviously, we're toiling in the same vineyard musically, so I know a lot of these, but some of them I didn't. For instance, I'm Into Something Good.
Interesting story on that one. Everybody knows the Herman's Hermits version, I'm Into Something Good. It was done just a little while before Herman's Hermits by a lady named Earl Jean. Now, she had been in the Cookies.
Right.
The Cookies had hits with Chains and Don't Say Nothing Bad About My Baby, written by Carole King and Jerry Goffin. Now, Carole King and Jerry Goffin also wrote this song for her when she went solo. And this version just barely scratched the top 40. I think it stopped at like number 37 or 38 on the charts and was kind of forgotten. But a lot of American music made it over to Europe, even obscure stuff, especially the obscure stuff. If you think about the stuff that the Beatles covered and the Rolling Stones covered, they weren't always big hits. They were pretty obscure flip sides and things like that. And that was the case with I'm Into Something Good. And, of course, the cover version by Peter Noonan, Herman's Hermits, is the one that everybody knows.
Woke up this morning feeling fine. There's something special on my mind. Last night I met a new girl in the neighborhood. Whoa, yeah. Something tells me I'm into something good. Something tells me I'm into something.
We're talking to Bob Leszczak today on the Vintage Rock and Pop Shop. He's the author of Who Did It First? Well, I should say the Who Did It First series of books, taking a look at the original versions of songs and the cover versions that made those songs hits. And speaking for myself, readers can have fun tracking down those original versions once you get the book.
It's almost like having an audiobook. If you listen to YouTube, you can find every one of these, I think, on YouTube while you're reading the book. and it just makes for an enhanced experience because you'll hear, oh yeah, well, that is the same song, but that's not the version I heard. But it's nice to hear that original.
Although it's not always the case that the original version is better than the later version.
A prime example of that is Little Darlin' by the Gladiolas. Of course, everybody knows the Diamonds version. Now, there's nothing wrong with the Gladiolas version. Maurice Williams, who was the lead singer, wrote the song. It was just that it was so poorly recorded. It's very primitive sounding, and in fact, the middle part, the talking part of that song, is not even complete. They didn't know where to go, so they just kind of stopped in the middle.
My dear, I need to call my own and never do wrong, and to hold in mind your little hand. I'll know too soon that all of them. Please come back to me.
The Diamonds took that song and just redid it and made it their own and really made a memorable cover version of it. That's one of the examples where the cover was actually better than the original. That was not always the case. I mean, just think Pat Boone. I mean,
Right. Oh, poor Pat.
Poor Pat.
My darling, I need you to call my own and never do wrong, to hold in mind your little hand. I'll know too soon that all is so grand. Please hold my hand.
You know, one of the ones that was a surprise to me, I'd never even considered it, was the Rolling Stones song, The Last Time.
That's an interesting one because it's not an identical copy, but it had been done as a gospel song originally by the Staple Singers. We know them later on for their more secular songs like I'll Take You There and Let's Do It Again, but they were singing gospel music in the 1950s, and they did a song called The Last Time, and in fact, the entire title is Maybe the Last Time, and it even ends with I Don't Know.
Right.
This may be my last time, maybe my last time, I don't know. Maybe in the morning, well, Lord, and maybe no.
Now, of course, that line was borrowed for the Rolling Stones version, and many people would not make that connection, but a few people did and approached Jagger and Richards about it, and they even fessed up and said, yeah, we were inspired by the Staple Singers. It's not an exact copy in that case, but similar enough where people would notice if they knew what the original sounded like, which is a very few people. But that information, you can hear the original version there on YouTube, like I said, and make your own comparison.
Well, this could be the last time. This could be the last time. Maybe the last time. I don't know. Oh no. Oh no.
I just keep thinking about that story of Andrew Lou Goldham locking Jagger and Richards in a room and saying, you can't come out of there until you've written a single. And then they come out of the room with The Last Time, which is kind of a rip-off of a Staple Singer song.
Well, they were doing a lot of covers early on. It's All Over Now was done by Bobby Womack and the Valentinos. That's in my book. And, of course, they did not fade away, the old Buddy Holly and the Crickets song. And just like the early Beatles, many of the things they did early on were covers until they really got comfortable writing their own material.
Now, another one of your favorites from the book.
Well, I think just because history has taken it and proven it, the song Only in America, 1963, not released, but recorded originally by the Drifters.
Only in America can a guy from anywhere go to sleep a pauper and wake up a millionaire. Only in America can a kid without a cent get a break and maybe grow up to be president. Only in America land of opportunity. Would a classy girl like you fall for a boy?
Now, the original version, the way it was originally written, was kind of snarky, kind of a negative song.
Right.
And Lieber and Stoller stepped in and said, you know, let's make it more playful, more fun, because this is 1963, and this is an African-American group singing about washing cars now and becoming president, and this was just at the very inception of the whole civil rights movement.
Right.
That was just getting traction, that was just getting underway, and they wanted to make it more appropriate. Well, Atlantic Records recorded it but never released it, at least not initially in 1963. They thought it just wasn't the right time for an African-American group to be singing that material with all of the unrest going on. So the song was presented. Lieber and Stoller had a connection at United Artists Records, a guy named Lou Crefetz. So they brought the song over there, and they said, this will be perfect for a group we have called Jay and the Americans.
Only in America, land of opportunity, yeah. Would a classy girl like you fall for a poor boy like me? Only in America, and a kid who's washing cars take a giant step.
Jay and the Americans recorded it, had a pretty big hit with it, a top 20 hit, only in America. And it took until 1972 for the Drifters version to come out on an album in the UK. That's the first time it came out. And, of course, that line, can be washing cars and grow up to be president, came true in 2008 with President Barack Obama. So it all came true. In fact, there's a quote from Mike Stoller in my book about that event, and he's very proud of that.
I have another one for you that I thought was fascinating, was Iko Iko.
Yeah, because it originally had a different title.
Yeah.
It was Giacomo, and there's an interesting one to hear. It's actually an older song than even that. It's like a New Orleans standard, but
right.
he James Crawford and the Cane Cutters on Checker Records, they put it out and made it a rock and roll song. It hadn't been that, but it was like an early rhythm and blues transitional record. It didn't really go anywhere.
Sitting by the bayou, my spy boy, do your spy boy, I'm gonna set your flag on fire. Talking about hey now, hiko, hande, Giacomo filo handande, Giacomo finande. Oh, look at my queen all dressed in red, hiko, hande. I bet you $5 she'll kill you dead, Giacomo finande.
It's very out of key. If you listen to it, it's almost hard to listen to.
Right.
But of course, that song morphed into, it's very similar to what would become Iko Iko years later, although the original writers of the song would not get credit. If you look at the Dixie Cups single, it has their names as the composers of that song, which is very interesting. A lot of interesting things were done with songwriting credits back in the day.
Aiko, aiko, ande. Shagamo fino, anande. Shagamo finande. My flag boy and your flag boy sitting by the fire. My flag boy to your flag boy, I'm gonna set your flag on fire. Talking about hey now, hey now, aiko, aiko, ande.
In the case of a song that becomes more well-known through the cover version than the original version, have you run across, because I'm sure you've talked to people and done research, have you run across the original artists who've maybe been a bit bitter that the cover wound up being more successful?
You would think so, but surprisingly, especially if they wrote the song, like Little Richard or Fats Domino,
right,
people like that, they're actually grateful. Initially, they were not. Back in the 1950s, when their song was just starting to gain traction on the charts, and then Pat Boone would come in and take over and really have the number one on the pop charts, while the Little Richard version the Fats Domino version would be like number 12, number 15 on the charts. If they wrote the song, the fact that it was covered and went to number 1 got them a lot of royalties. So over the years, it actually helped them and helped popularize their song more than they would have admitted back initially in the 1950s. So surprisingly, nowadays their mood has changed, their perspective has changed. They're very grateful that their songs were actually covered, which is not what one would expect.
Right. I've got one more for you here. Speaking of someone who wrote a song, but then the original version was done by someone other than the author, and that's I Got You, I Feel Good.
Yeah, very unique. 1962, the song was written by James Brown and even produced by James Brown for King Records, the same record label, and it was called I Found You originally. And it was done by a lady named Yvonne Fair.
I feel good, like I knew that I would. I feel good, like I knew that I would. So good that I found you. I feel nice.
Very interesting. This is one you should listen to on YouTube because all of the James Brown haze and shrieks that he does in I Got You, I Feel Good are in this original version. It's just a little bit slower, but you can hear, I mean, it's almost identical as far as the presentation. And it didn't really go anywhere for Yvonne Fair in 1962, but James Brown, riding on the coattails of Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, that was his big follow-up to that, and he did it a little bit faster, and of course, his version is the one that's legendary. But both on King Records, just like 4 years apart.
I knew that I would not. So good, so good. I got you. Wow, I feel nice. A sugar and spice.
Now, you mentioned that subsequent volumes would be a rock and roll book and then a country crossover book about covers, correct?
Actually, the second one is country crossovers and pop songs. So it goes way back to even like the Tin Pan Alley songs and their origin, songs written by people like Johnny Mercer and Hoagie Carmichael and stuff like that, and how they transitioned into rock and roll. The rock and roll versions, if you think about how many standards were covered in rock and roll, I Only Have Eyes for You, Once in a While, Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, and all of those songs. There are tons of songs that actually go back to the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, when they had their origin. Stardust, Deep Purple. There's a ton of those songs. Right through the 1960s, there were a lot of those old standards, and many people may not realize that some of these songs actually come from like Broadway musicals, like I Got Rhythm by The Happenings,
right,
and songs like that. And so that's what Volume 2 is about. I actually call it the pop volume, and then the rock and roll volume will come out in July. And that'll be the third and final volume of Who Did It First.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you ever have an idea for a fourth volume, what about groups that have covered themselves? You know, they've taken a song and then maybe rewrote it and released it several times.
And, you know, I do address that because, of course, Neil Sedaka had two versions of Breaking Up Is Hard to Do.
Right.
Tommy Edwards had two different distinct versions on the same label of It's All in the Game. The Dells had the doo-wop version of Oh What a Night plus the soul version in the 1960s. There was Todd Rundgren with Nas doing Hello, It's Me, and then his solo version.
Right.
And I'm sure there are many others that Layla by Eric Clapton, he did that twice.
Yep.
And, that would, I don't know if there would be enough for a whole volume, but maybe a chapter.
There you go. Well, if someone wanted to get the book, where would be the best place for them to get it?
They could look on Amazon.com. It's available there, if they can spell my last name. Actually, if they just type in Who Did It First under books, they'll be able to find it there. Barnes & Noble has it. The publisher has it, Rowman and Littlefield, and Rowman is spelled R-O-W-M-A-N. And my last name's a little tough, but it's Leszczak, L-E-S-Z-C-Z-A-K. Or if you just do Bob O'Brien, which is my radio name, you'll find me that way, too.
Well, it's a great book. I recommend it. It's, You know, it's not something that you would necessarily sit down and read from, beginning to end. It's a reference book, and you could just sort of think of a song.
It's a good skip around.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a heck of a lot of fun. And again, some of those tunes, like I'm Into Something Good, I never realized that it was done by anybody else other than Herman's Hermits.
And there's a lot of cool pictures of all the records that are in there are actually my records. And some great interview clips from people like Kim Carnes, Mike Stoller, Brian Hyland, Neil Sedaka, and the list goes on, Mary Wilson, and many others. And it's also available in Kindle.
Oh, there you go. That's right for you
It's
folks.
cheaper that way if you want to save yourself some coins.
Right. I guess I'm not too familiar with that, but I guess you can look at it on your iPod.
Yes,
right?
you can.
Yeah, I see. So there you go. If you're on the subway or something, it's perfect for that. Well, thanks so much, Bob, for chatting with us today.
Thank you for having me. Anytime.
All right. We'll have you on for the next volume.
I can't wait. That'll be March.